I am so really pleased to be able to introduce Vicky, who will talk about the work she's been doing with small-scale societies, indigenous groups, and the links to not just life satisfaction, subjective well-being, but also levels of income and others. So she's really, I mean, when I first saw her papers appear back 2-3 years ago now, joined with Chris, it was top of mind for me, like, oh, it would be amazing if we could somehow have Vicky join us and speak to us about her work. And so here we are, the day has come. So Vicky, over to you. And as you know, we'll try and keep it relatively brief, run through material. Any clarifying questions by all means, and then we'll stop the filming, and then we'll have the more general Q&A, and then head over to the King's Arms.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. And let me start with a disclaimer. I was telling Jan, this is not my main research topic. I'm a professor at the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. My main research line has to do with indigenous knowledge and how indigenous knowledge relates to biodiversity and climate change. How indigenous people perceive the environment, relate, value, etc. But within that, I have been doing this, I call it my pet research, is on subjective well-being and small-scale societies. And I'm gonna try to bring those things together at the end of the talk. So, yeah. So, oops. Let me just start with some graphs that might be familiar to you, and I'm not gonna pretend I'm gonna explain you these graphs. I just wanna notice that the main narrative about subjective well-being and about happiness has to do with how that there is variation in life satisfaction that can be measured. You can measure how people are happier, the subjective well-being. It can be measured, and you can measure that there is variation, and there are some research like this one that is familiar to you showing that. And another big part of this narrative is that life satisfaction, one of the robust findings in this literature is this other idea that life satisfaction is somehow related to income, right, or to your level of material wealth. And this is something that is in the literature. There are discussions about, okay, is there a tipping point? I mean, you know all this literature, right? But my point here is not to explain you that, it's just to say that this is a narrative, right? When you open the newspapers, like, oh, the Finnish are the happiest country in the world, or like you need to have 7,000 US dollars. 75,000 to actually for the line to start not growing more happy, whatever. So this is a narrative, right? Happiness can be measured, and money somehow relates to this level of happiness. So with this talk, I want to challenge a little bit this idea and this narrative that the economic growth, because I mean, I don't think these ideas necessarily say that economic growth is needed for life satisfaction, but this is the reading that it's being in the public, right? The public is reading, you need more money. This is not what the data is saying, but this is what it's out there, right? And I want to, with the presentation I'm gonna give now, is to challenge this narrative of how economic growth is actually needed for life satisfaction. And I'm gonna do that through these case studies in these minimally monetized societies. And as I was telling to John, all this came from my initial research. I was working with indigenous societies in the Bolivian Amazon, but then I extended to other places. And these are societies that don't have, I mean, it's not that they don't have money, they know money, but they don't rely on money as we do. Their life can be perfectly functional without money. They use it eventually, but they are self-sufficient and they don't need it, and they are perfectly happy. And if you think about that, for most of the human society, people have been happy or not happy without money. Money is an invention that it's recently, I mean, it's relatively recent, and associating money to happiness, it's a little bit disturbing because it's kind of like, I mean, we have been happy as a human beings without that. So I wanted to explore more a little bit that, and so we started in this research that was about how traditional knowledge helps in adaptation to the environment. So it was not about happiness. We introduced this question of like life satisfaction. from a 0 to 10. It was actually from a 0 to 5 because these are societies that are not really, they don't have numbers. Like, for example, the Baka in Cameroon, they only can count, they count only until 5, and then 6 is 5 plus 1, 5 plus 2. So even using the numbers, it's a challenge, right? You cannot say from 0 to 10 because 10 doesn't mean it's too big of a number from them. So I introduced this question of like from 0 to 5, or in this scale, how satisfied are you with your life? This is the research, maybe that's one of the research that you saw at the beginning. And in this, here you have like these plots of like the three societies. And one of the interesting things here is that people are fairly happy. I mean, they are usually, when you ask them how happy are you, they are just happy. I mean, most of it's skewed to the good and very good. Here, interestingly, we could ask people, when we ask, how happy are you, or where did you position yourself, what's your life satisfaction? And we ask them a follow-up question, why? Why are you giving me this answer? Regardless of whether they were telling us that they were very unhappy or very satisfied or very unsatisfied. And we classify those responses into different categories. Some of the responses have to be, they were very general. I'm just doing well, they have no problem, so just happy. I mean, what's wrong? Many have to do with health, both positive or negative. I have some health issue, or my family has some health issue, but also like I'm not sick, so I'm happy and I'm healthy. Many have to do with social issues. I have problems with authorities. My wife is jealous, so some of these social issues. Some have to do with self-sufficiency, because as I say, income was not like a real concern, but having food or having a good hunt, having been successful in fishing, all these things really matter to people. And then the income and material wealth, like I don't have a machete, or I lost my canoe. So we kind of like were able to ask this follow-up. It was very interesting, and this is a graph of the unexplained observations. Many times when we ask, how did you place yourself from 0 to 5, and they say, I'm just fine. Why? I'm just fine. So they didn't have like a real question. So most of the unexplained observations are when they are feeling happy. They were able to give us only explanations where they were not feeling happy. So when they say my life satisfaction is low, I mean I'm very bad, I'm feeling bad, or like I'm not good. Why? Oh, because I have this health problem, because my wife is jealous, because I lost. So they were more able to explain why they were not feeling satisfied with life than the contrary. When we look a little bit of these distributions of the responses in general, this is like these numbers here represent, considering whether the response was positive or negative, we see that in the three societies, health play an important role in explaining whether you feel satisfied or unsatisfied. Health is 41% of the responses for the Chiman, 20 for the Baka, and 63 for the Punan. And so the other things are kind of like important, but most of the reasons of why people were able to explain their feeling had to do with health, and then with this, in the Chimane, with social life, self-sufficiency, and in the Baka, this general there might be also social, cultural issues, or maybe how the people collected the data, but it was very general, like, why are you happy? Just because, I'm just happy. So what's the takeaway of this first part of this first study that we did? That there is a relatively high subjective well-being, as you saw at the beginning. Like most of the responses were that people were feeling good or very good, and people are more able to explain their life satisfaction when it relates to a negative feeling. And we call this paper, the title of this paper is "I'm happy just because." Because the general idea that we got is that the general status of people is one of not super happy, but contentment, Like they feel good, and they are able to explain you why they are when they are not feeling good, and they can give you a reason, but because that for them is the extraordinary, right? Because the normal is to just be happy. Well, that was our interpretation of the data. So then this was 3 societies. So I wanted to explore a little bit more, and as I say, I have like all these other big research projects, and I put these happiness questions and I throw them there. I had this big ERC project that's an European Research Council Consolidator grant that was on perceptions of climate change. So the whole project, that it's called LICCI, and there is a web page that you can look at if you're interested in climate change and perceptions, was we wanted to explore how local knowledge can contribute to these global understandings of climate change and the impacts, and bring this knowledge to the international climate change policy, right? And create a network of researchers around that. But in this project ran in 52 communities around the world. We distribute the communities based on the idea that people living in different climate zones, because this was about climate change, right? So it was about climate zones and livelihood activities. So we have like these 52 sites in arid areas, tropical areas, snow, polar, and we have hunter-gatherers, agriculturalists, pastoralists, agropastoralists. So we have like this mix of livelihoods and climate zones. And the goal of this project was to collect data that was locally meaningful but cross-culturally comparable. So you could ask a question that the people understand, because if it's climate change, you are not going to ask, is the ocean, is the glacier melting if you're in the desert, right? You need to ask questions that are more locally relevant, but that then you could actually compare. So we work with local partners, and we did all this like more qualitative work, and at the end we did the structured interviews, and that's where I thought, let me just put the life satisfaction question and see what we get. So we got life satisfaction data in 19 sites, and this is a paper that Chris is also part of this paper. It's led by a colleague of him and mine that was in McGill, and now it's moving back to Barcelona. We collected data in 19 sites, so about 3,000 people. And the characteristic of the selection, one of the criteria for the selection is that people who depend on nature for their livelihoods, right? And they are distributed across the globe. Again, what did we find? And we asked this life satisfaction question. In this case, we used the scale of 10. So when you look at the distribution, again, we found that people are quite happy. Like the average was 6.8, no? So there is a distribution, but when you look through it, people have relatively high levels of happiness. We have in this work, we also look at income. We didn't have a proper measure of income because many of these societies don't have income, so we use wealth. We had like a measure of wealth that it's related to, this is the idea of the local meaningful but cross-culturally comparable, right? We ask items that are meaningful in the communities. And when you look at when you do this proxy of like the wealth for income, you see that they are all very low income, right? But their levels of happiness are quite widespread, and many of them are above some of the happiest countries that in your data, or in the data that it's used, right? So that was kind of like a very interesting point, and it has in the logic that we have, right? No, like people are happy no matter well, people can be happy no matter what their income is. I repeat, these are societies that don't necessarily depend on income for their life. I mean, these are not poor people living in a city, or these are, you can consider them poor with the standards of the World Bank because they don't make the money, but they just take their machete, go to the forest, and bring back food. No, so the whole concept of their lives is different. We did try to do this correlation with income and life satisfaction, and there is a correlation. but the correlation explains very little. So this is just to say that the data doesn't necessarily contradict the fact that there might be a relation between income and life satisfaction. It might be there, but that income explains very little of like the actual life satisfaction measure of the people. So what's the takeaway of this second study? So what I take away is that we find this very high average level of life satisfaction, and these are comparable to wealthy countries. And this is despite the fact that they have very low monetary incomes. I'm just going to present quickly this third study that is also using the same data from this LICCI project. This is under review now, so it's not published, but and in this one, what I did was Chris is also part of this paper and this Eric Galbraith. We tried to see the main idea of the LICCI project was to kind of like evaluate your perception of climate change. How much do you think climate change is affecting you? And for that, we kind of like have a score of like, okay, I perceive climate change is affecting me. Like, I think doctors do that, no? I feel very bad or very, no? So it's a little bit more precise. That how much, in a scale from 0 to 15, how many changes do I see and how severe these changes are affecting me? It's raining less because I'm an agriculturalist, I'm losing my crops, I'm being very affected. But it's a little bit hotter, but I have AC in my home, I don't feel affected, right? So this is the idea. And when you look at the perception of severity and life satisfaction, we actually found that people who perceive more climate change report, not people, communities. These are averaged by communities. So communities that feel more affected by climate change impacts, that feel that their environment is changing, also report lower levels of life satisfaction. We found the same. These are data here with severity and perception of climate change. So this is subjective data. How do I feel affected? And we did the same with instrumental variables. So we look at the data on changes in rainfall, changes in temperature, like the actual meteorological data, and we found kind of like similar trends. So what's the takeaway of this third study? That there is this negative association between the site-aggregated life satisfaction metrics and the perceptions of climate change and the actual climate change impacts measured with meteorological or instrumental data. Okay. So let me just go back to what do I get out of this. I started these talks telling you that I am mostly interested, or my main research line is this Save the Earth, environmental kind of like point of view, and how indigenous knowledge can help us to relate differently to nature. So there is a lot of evidence. I have also worked in the IPBES. The evidence is now clear that nature and the contributions that nature does to people are degrading. No? Nature is biodiversity is being lost, nature is being degraded, and if you look at that, these are data that from the IPBES, the global report, not only species are decreasing, but also every single contribution that nature has to do to people has decreased in the last 50 years, except extraction of energy, extraction of food, and extraction of material. So we are extracting from nature, right? And these contributions of nature are increasing, but this is generating that everything else is going down, no? Air quality is going down, ocean acidification, etc. So there is like this trend. And there is also a lot of evidence from the IPBES from the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment that this is due to the economic model in which we live and the underlying causes of this biodiversity loss, and this is recent work from the IPBES, is this material view of the immediacy and the primacy of like everything, the material wealth, and this idea of the Western societies that wealth and income and everything has to be now, and how we call it, prioritization of short-term individual and material gains. That's a much more clear wording of what I was saying, right? Concentration of power and wealth and disconnection from domination of people and nature. So I am bringing these slides back at the end because I think that the data that we are showing can help us in this change of the narrative that I was saying at the beginning, right? Humans, the data that we are presenting or the data that we have looked at, it shows that human societies can support life satisfaction, lives that people are happy with their life without requiring this high degree of monetary wealth. I mean, it's not necessary that you have this monetary wealth to be happy. And the narrative that it's out there is not that. The narrative is that money is going to make you happy, no? And this challenge, and this comes also from the institute where I am based, where there is a lot of research on degrowth, growth, post-growth, the limits to growth, right? That's where we work. And I think this data fits well in this context of saying, okay, we can have, it's not that we can have, we have societies in the world that are perfectly happy, or I mean, they are happy without this dependence on the material growth and the economic well-being. And we can, as scholars, contribute to change the narrative by showing that this is, I mean, it's not genetic, that we need more money to be happy. So, I mean, and the data is there. Okay, so this is what I had to say.
Thank you, Vicky.